What's up, basketball fans, and welcome to Raptors Endgame on Raptors Republic, a podcast where we talk basketball with people who actually cover the sport. My name is Lukas Weese, host of Raptors Endgame, and I'm pleased to be joined by national NBA writer for the Boston Globe, Gary Washburn. Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's really good to be here. Thanks.
Anytime, and it's my pleasure. And Gary, we'll get into, of course, a bit of the Boston Celtics Toronto Raptors series in just a moment. But it was 1 week ago where the players elected to strike in the wake of the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. It then led to an agreement with the NBA and NBPA, which, of course, outlined some actionable items to combat systemic racism and police brutality. And you were actually in the bubble and were there on the front lines reporting on this. So I'm just curious what it was like for you just to be there, to report on this moment, and how were you able to sort of compartmentalize what this moment meant for the sport and the country?
There was a definite benchmark moment in sports where the players definitely exerted their power, and it was more than a shut up and dribble situation, or I'm just worried about my marketing or my Twitter followers or Instagram followers. It was definitely been a collective effort of players who want change in their communities. They want to see differences. They want adjustments. They want America to be fair to all communities and all people and not just certain people. So I thought this whole thing was just about kind of being fed up with what's going on in our society, especially in the United States. And the players felt like they weren't doing enough, and they felt like they weren't getting enough help, with this situation. So they decided, let's exert our power. Let's go to the owners and say, hey, we don't want to play, and we're not going to play unless some certain conditions are done. We're not down here just to hang out and play ball for your entertainment. We're here for a dual purpose: to play and to make changes and give us a platform to make changes in our community. And I think that they were able to do that. They have been able to do that. But I think the Jacob Blake shooting kind of was an example of things aren't changing as fast as they like. And so it was time for them to exhibit their power and, potentially walk out. And as much as that's some people could say, oh, they were never going to do that. And some people, I don't think it was an idle threat. I think that there's many players who were serious, and there's other players that was like, hey, if everybody else is walking out, I'm not going to go against those guys. So there was just a lot going on in a few days.
No doubt, and of course, the Milwaukee Bucks were the leaders there. Of course, many basketball fans remember the statement read by Sterling Brown and George Hill in front of the locker room. I'm sure I remember seeing on your Twitter that you actually filmed that entire statement. So maybe just walk me through, without, as a reporter, sort of the process of how you try to report on that day, and just in terms of what's going on.
Well, you just try to understand the moment. It was a common day. It was about to be Game 5 between the Bucks and the Magic, a 4:00 start. It was pretty obvious the Bucks were going to close them out. So, it wasn't anything abnormal. It was like, okay, well, some reporters were going to go to the game, and other reporters were going to stay in their hotels and work because they got stuff to do, and maybe go to the later games. That was the night, obviously, the Lakers were supposed to play the Trailblazers and the Rockets and the Thunder. So there were two other more intriguing games that night. I think people were more preparing for. And so once that went down and the Bucks decided they weren't going to play, then it was like, okay, well, let's see what's going on here. And we all headed down to the arena, and they were basically meeting in their locker room, still in uniform, while the Magic players were starting to leave. And then we saw like, okay, this is really big. And then we were hearing that in the other arena, the Rockets and Thunder showed up and then went back to their hotels, and the Lakers and the Blazers weren't going to play either later on that night. So it's one of those situations where, it's sort of historic because it never seemed like anything like this before, where it was a boycott, or there was a game canceled. It wasn't weather related or a tragedy or something like that. It was just, we don't want to play and we're not going to play until some conditions get met.
And in terms of those conditions that were met, of course, includes a social justice coalition, arenas turned into polling stations during the 2020 general election, as well as networks using advertising spots to promote greater civic engagement. I know it's a step, Gary, but do you think that having these actionable items are important in the grander scheme of things when we look back on this event, just in terms of allowing the players to, like you say, hold these owners to account, because they're the ones that have the influence and connections to hopefully change, to combat systemic racism within society?
Well, I think we're going to find that out. I think that the players are putting more pressure on the owners to be more active and not reactive, but more proactive in their civic duties. These are very powerful men. You have, the NBA players, many of them are very rich, LeBron James and James Hardens and so on. But the owners obviously are paying their salaries. They make a little bit more money. They're in the billions. So they can get into the meetings. They can make the impact that maybe the players can't. So that's why I think there was an overall kind of like plea to the owners to y'all got to make something happen. Like there's got to be some plans here, short term and long term. There's some long term plans, a $300 million plan over 10 years that the NBA implemented a few months ago. So it's not like the owners weren't doing anything, but the players felt like after the Jacob Blake thing and that, like, wait a minute, like things aren't taking off as fast as we thought they would be. And so the voting thing became a big deal, because we have a huge election here in the States in November 3rd, which could essentially determine the fate of our country. Every presidential election is like that, but this one is like probably the biggest of my lifetime in terms of like where our country goes. So you want to get people who didn't vote in the 2016 election, and only 60% of eligible American voters voted. So the players think that that's a kind of an immediate thing that they can work on. And so that's why some of these arenas has been turned to polling centers, and that the right exercise the vote, kind of slogan has been promoted over the last week, because that's the most probably immediate action you could take.
Absolutely. And we've seen teams like the Brooklyn Nets turning the Barclays Center into a polling station. I know that Toronto Raptors head coach Nick Nurse has been very vocal about trying to get Canadians, American citizens who are living in Canada, to vote in this election. So that's, of course, incredibly important to try to affect change. But Gary, obviously LeBron James, Chris Paul, they bring, an influence and a status when they have these conversations in terms of trying to affect change and create an action plan. But how important were the voices of players like Fred VanVleet or Norman Powell or Jaylen Brown, who I thought in the days preceding the actual walkout were some of the most vocal and eloquent regarding this situation, and just very candid about what they were feeling in that particular moment?
Well, I think there was a lot of voices that came out. It was not only the star players, but it was guys like Fred VanVleet and Norman Powell and Jaylen Brown, some of the guys who are, rising stars, or guys who are, 4 or 5 years in the league, maybe not real grizzled vets yet, but guys who have been around a little bit. And they had something to say. I think there was a lot of voices that had impact in those meetings. I think it's inaccurate to assume that all the players feel the same. These guys come from different backgrounds. They have different ways of thinking. So you're taking 13 teams of 15, 16 guys. So you're basically putting almost 200 guys in a room. They're not all going to think the same. And there's other guys that wanted to leave, and there's other guys that were like, no, why are we doing that? Why are we doing all this here if we're just going to walk away from this? So I think a lot of guys had impact. I think Fred VanVleet was one of the ones who kind of kicked this off with the boycott talk, I think on Tuesday, when the Raptors had closed out the Nets, and, the first practice and the Jacob Blake thing had happened that Sunday, I think the day of the closeout game between the Nets and the Raptors. And so Fred was in a completely different mood, and so was Norman Powell. Like, they weren't trying to talk about basketball. So I think that kind of sparked this whole thing. Then it kind of spread to George Hill, making some statements the night before. But then, the Bucks kind of picked up on what VanVleet was saying, and that they were talking between the Celtics and Raptors about boycotting. And then the Bucks kind of took the baton from there and took it to another level, and obviously did boycott. So I think there's a lot of voices that made impact during these meetings. There's a lot of intelligent people, intelligent players in the NBA who have a lot to say, and they might not be superstars on the floor yet, but they're very astute, outstanding men.
From your reporting, Gary, how close was this to shutting down and players leaving the bubble?
I don't think it was very close. I think it was discussed. There was a lot of options discussed, but I think it was one of the things that was discussed. And who's going to take the lead? Who's going to say, what is the game? I think the biggest issue was that the Bucks really didn't have a game plan after the boycott. And I think that there was some anger with the Bucks of okay, y'all did this, but what are y'all going to do now? Are y'all just not going to play anymore? Are you going to drop out this tournament? Do you want us to drop out? What's the end game? Are we going to continue? Just the boycott? What are we trying to do here? And I think that was one thing that I felt like was legitimate. There's some players angry about that because they were like, okay, y'all did this, but you could have told us, we could have had a conference call the night before or the morning of, and we could have figured this thing out. So I don't think it was close, but I think there were players who were willing to walk out. Yeah, there were, and in this bubble, it's tough on guys mentally, to stay in the same place for two plus months now, not be around your family, not being able to go to your favorite restaurant or go to some of your favorite places. Even though there's a pandemic, you can go with a mask on or go to the beach or go things that are, what guys do in the summertime with their families, and they're able to do that. So there's some guys who are just mentally drained and tired, and then some are probably really ready to go.
No doubt, and it was actually, your answer leads into my next question, because I think there is, a mental toll on these athletes and everyone involved in the bubble. And I get people that say, well, these guys are millionaires and they're playing in Disney World. They should feel they should be privileged. But at the end of the day, you can't understate the mental toll that being in the bubble and all this has had on them, and even probably members of the media or anyone covering the NBA playoffs in the bubble. I know that LeBron James said after the Lakers beat the Blazers that he's thought about leaving the bubble. So it's just interesting to me, Gary, just what your just thoughts have been on just the bubble life and whether the sentiments of the players in terms of the mental toll are valid in terms of bubble life and living in the bubble.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's a little mentally challenging to be in the same place on the same campus. It's great to watch a bunch of basketball. For them, it's great to play. It's great. They have made all the amenities. They've turned ballrooms into practice floors. They have turned the three arenas they had here into nice facilities. They've got the virtual fans. They got a DJ for everyone. They have tried to make this as acceptable and high level as possible. So I don't think anyone's upset about that. Like, it's not like this situation is not 100% first class. It's just there's only so many video games you can play, or being around the guys, and you want your family with you. You want to be able to leave. You want to be able to get in your car and drive 20 miles to a nice restaurant or a beach or something like that. And these guys, none of us can do that. I'm not really. I mean, I don't expect people to feel bad for any of us or the people, especially the players, but that could be mentally challenging and draining. And so a lot of these guys, all they have to do is look at their phones and be on social media. And when they're hearing, like Paul George said, you're trash, you're playing, people don't lighten up on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And if you got an Instagram account and people are leaving all your these comments and just, people are just relentless on Twitter. I mean, it's unfortunate that that's what we have turned into on Twitter, is just saying things that we would never say to someone in person, being very, very distasteful, trashy in some ways. It's really unfortunate, but that's what the players have to do. They read that stuff, it gets them down, and then they start pressing. And then other guys like, well, where my family? I want to go back to where I'm from. It can get to you. So mentally, it's a challenge. Now, so for some, it's not. They're fine here. They've been fine. Others, it's been a challenge because it's like, wow, I just want to be able to go somewhere else besides the arena and my hotel room. And you really can. You can walk around this campus a little bit. Maybe, they have fishing available, golf.
Mm-hmm.
But we as media, we can't go to the amusement park. That's out. The players can't do that. So there's a lot of limitations.
I know you're there in person, Gary, and I know that many members of the media aren't and are trying to write stories from press conferences via Zoom. Even though you're there in person, how has your job changed or different compared to, let's say, just a normal season covering the NBA playoffs?
Well, you're covering when there was 22 teams here when we started, so you can go to the practice of 10 teams a day if you want. If you really wanted to go, run yourself ragged and go to a bunch of practices and talk to a bunch of coaches and players, you can. It's like a basketball convention here. Everyone's in the same place, so it's just different. You're never covering a playoff series where you can go to another series the next day just to go to a game. Like, if I want to, I can go to the Heat Bucks series and watch that and go talk to those guys. Like, that's unprecedented. I've never had that before. We would be in normal season, we would be in Boston right now getting ready for Game 4, and I'd watch the Heat Bucks on TV, and the Lakers and Rockets. But I can actually go. That's something that's probably never going to happen again like that if we return to the arenas next year. So that's what makes this job unique. Also, as a reporter, you get the chance to see the players. It's a more casual situation. The players walk right past you. They see you, you see them, so they know you're going through the same things they're going through in the bubble, getting tested every day, taking our temperature and oxygen saturation every day and put it in an app on our phone. The things that we go through, we all are kind of sharing a shared experience. So there's kind of like okay, you're here too. You're going through the same thing I'm going through. I think that's why some of the players were a little angry that Adam Silver wasn't down here, because it's easy to be in the second tier where, you don't get tested as much and you can hang out for a week and go home. But being in here, it separates, the people who really want to be here and really love the game from people who are, might not have that desire as much. And there's a lot of people who, there's players who opted out, who didn't want to come down here. And for quote unquote health reasons. I think some guys just didn't want to be confined like this. So it's definitely a challenge, but our jobs are actually in the bubble better because there's more access and there's basketball. Like tonight I can, go to the other two playoff games, and just watch. I mean, I couldn't do that, during the season, a normal season.
No, for sure. I mean, like, and as you said, I think basketball convention is a perfect way to put it. And I think for you as well, as a national writer, with so many players there all in one place and different personnel, I guess, the same rules apply, that you just have to rely on the relationships that you've cultivated throughout your career in order to be able to write really compelling stories. Whereas, and same for those who aren't there and are covering the NBA playoffs via Zoom, I think it's even more important as well, because I definitely feel for those people that can't be there in person, because there's just a real disconnect. Like, I mean, as much as there is the Zoom media conferences that sort of emulate what a press conference is like, you don't have those one-off opportunities where you can walk with a player or coach off the podium like you would normally do in, let's say, the normal NBA playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, there's some advantages to being in here. What I did notice is kind of funny is like the television broadcast is literally 10 to 12 or 15 seconds behind. So I see the game and I'm tweeting the game, and there are people who are following me talking about they're 4 plays behind, which is on TV. So, I mean, that's an advantage. You can, the game lasted, the game Thursday night, I saw it live. OG hit the 3, and there were people who were literally 20 seconds later. Oh my God, it's what a shot! So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of advantages in terms of professionally being, getting to know the players, seeing them every day, being able to pull them aside, talk to them, and then I said before, like they see you, they know you're going through the same thing they're going through, so there's a sense of kind of an admiration there. Like, okay, you're one of you're part of this group here because we're all going through the same thing.
There have been so many, great moments of basketball in the bubble. I mean, OG Anunoby's buzzer-beating 3 in Game 3 for the Raptors last night. You think of Luka Doncic's game winner. I'm just curious for you, Gary, because, from a viewer like myself at home, it is a little strange to not have the crowd and the atmosphere when a big moment like that happens. Is it strange for you in those arenas to just hear the players cheering when a big moment like that happens?
Well, they do have the piped in crowd noise. That does make a difference because it doesn't allow you to hear things as much, and it's not as quiet. During the scrimmage games before they piped in the noise, and a couple of seeding games, it was really quiet. Like in the arena, you could hear the shoes squeaking. You could hear guys really talk to each other. It was dead silent during free throws. It was literally like a library. So that's not the case anymore. They've piped in the crowd noise. They brought the virtual fans in, although you can't hear them. But, the crowd noise and the music, there's constant music during the games also. And then also, the organ for depending on the team, people chanting defense, that type of thing, So, I could see being disconnected if you're covering from your city because, like when you're just watching the games on TV and 2, you're just doing everything through Zoom calls. The atmosphere is different. I think the players are used to it by now. I mean, now with 8 seeded games, and I think the Raptors and Celtics have both played if you just include the scrimmages, 8, 4, 12, 15 games now in this atmosphere. So they're sort of used to it. That's close to a quarter of a season. So I think they're sort of used to the atmosphere. They just know, we all know it's different. It's not the same. You're not hearing, it would have been deafening in there last night with Lowry trying to throw a pass to Anunoby, Taco falling to get, it would have been deafening in Tea Garden. And it wasn't. It was just a piped in crowd noise. And then when OG hit the shot, there was just silence. And so you could just hear the Raptors run to the floor. So there wasn't any boos or anything like that or any sounds of shock. It was just sort of like a AAU game.
Yeah, there would have been sounds of shock and boos from the TD Garden crowd if when OG hit that shot. But Gary, you were there live to experience that Game 3 last night. It certainly looked like the Celtics had it in the bag after that Kemba Walker backhanded pass in the paint Theis for the dunk. Just, again, I guess it just speaks to the Toronto Raptors and their ability to just never give up and never underestimate the heart of a champion to be able to, come away with that win. And Kyle Lowry, of course, that great pass to OG setting up the game winner.
Yeah, I mean, they very much executed on that final play. It was interesting. OG was like, I think, the fourth option.
Yeah.
With Pete Siakam and Van Vliet and maybe Gasol, but Anunoby was the fourth option on that play. But he was wide open. Great play to kind of tiptoe the baseline. And I think Jaylen Brown got caught up in I can't let Siakam beat me. We can't, I think the Celtics understandably were like, we can't let Van Vliet get a clean look and we can't let Siakam get a clean look. But OG Anunoby's been the best shooter in the series. He's had a really good series so far. I think the Celtics have been okay with letting relegated. They've been okay to let him score because it takes the ball out of other guys' hands, and he's done a good job. He's hit a couple of key three-pointers, obviously the biggest of the series so far on Thursday. So, it was a great pass by Lowry. I mean, there's a lot of mistakes on the Celtics side. Brown kind of fell asleep, but they were playing zone. He was so into not letting Siakam, and then when he noticed, and then there's big Gasol kind of standing in his way. And Gasol's a wily veteran. He's going to be slow to move. He's not going to, it wasn't exactly like a really designed screen, but he got in his way and then kind of slid. And by the time Jaylen was able to get away, it was too late. And it was a great shot by Anunoby, legit 26, 25 footer, right behind the stripe. So, yeah, I think the Raptors, I think they were a little discouraged with a few minutes left. It seemed like they were getting tired. Shots weren't going down. They just kind of kept hanging around. And then obviously the Celtics just need to make one more play, and they didn't. And that makes a difference in the series now. I mean, let's see how game 4 goes, because now Toronto, I don't know if they have their swagger back, but they felt like, okay, now we got a break. I mean, Nick Nurse has kind of been pushing we're not getting any breaks, and the refs have been against us, and nothing's worked, and that type of thing. But just looking through my eyes, and I'm not a Celtics fan, I just cover them. The Celtics have been a better team throughout the series. They just played better. They came out with a game plan to slow down Van Vliet, although Van Vliet caught fire in the second half Thursday. And, Lowry was a bulldog, as he usually is, making plays, driving the basket. But Anunoby's been key to the series because Siakam's not been very good, and Gasol can't hit a jumper. And so Anunoby's been the X factor. If you point to a player, you can point to Marcus Smart for the Celtics, and definitely now you can point to OG for the Raptors.
Yeah, I mean, OG's been shooting the ball with confidence. I think his defense has been very good. His active feet has led to a lot of deflections. And I think you make that great point, and a lot of Raptors fans today made that point about that Marc Gasol screen on that final play. I think it gets overlooked a bit, but it certainly allowed OG to get there. But and I also think, do you think that Tatum should have been a little bit more on OG there? Because it just seemed to me like OG went to the corner just with no one on him. It seemed like he could just tiptoe over there and bam, he's wide open.
Yeah, they were playing a zone, so they're supposed to guard the area. Tatum was supposed to defend Van Vliet in case Van Vliet. They were scared of Van Vliet getting the ball and taking one of those fadeaway, step back 23-footers and winning the game. That was their biggest fear. The second was Siakam, who hasn't been shooting the ball well. Anunoby was not a priority, and that's a mistake. He crept to the baseline, so basically Brown should have made the decision of, I'll let Gasol tie the game with a 16-footer. Okay. He hasn't been good at all series from the perimeter. He's struggled. I'll let him tie the game instead of the OT over letting Anunoby get it and win the game. And I think Brown got kind of caught up with Siakam, and then by the time he got stuck with Gasol, and by the time he saw, then Gasol got in his way and didn't let him just run unimpeded, which he shouldn't have. He made a heads-up, veteran-savvy play, and then OG got the ball and made it work, made the play. So, I mean, there's a lot of finger-pointing. I mean, I don't think it's terms of finger-pointing. Brown took a lot of responsibility last night for kind of slipping and not, I just think he was so consumed with, I can't let Siakam get it, and he should. And then he got stuck with Gasol, and then that 1 second that he kind of stuck with Gasol, that's when the play happened. He's like, oh man, you got to just let Gasol have the ball. If Gasol hits the tying shot, that's fine. You can't lose in that situation. That's like, obviously, as we know, the worst case scenario.
Gary, where do you think the series goes from here? I know that the Raptors, they had success, I think, in the second half with the high screen and roll. Boston, of course, they think they're up 3-0, and then all of a sudden it's now 2-1. Do you think it's, has the potential to be a long series, or do you think that Boston will forget about that and move on the rest of the way? Or do you think the Raptors, with giving them, this new life, they can start dropping shots?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the Saturday's game will be fascinating because are the Raptors back? And I thought they played a very good, I think they've done well in this series in the third quarter. The Celtics have not had good third quarters in this series. They were up 10, and they let VanVleet step into two straight three-pointers. It's a 4-point game then, so you have a chance to maybe extend the lead, get it to double digits, start getting them discouraged, and then suddenly Fred, boom, boom, 2 quick threes. It's a 4-point game, and now the Raptors are like, hey, this is a game again. And, that double-digit lead is gone. And that's just the slippage of the Celtics. Like some of that stuff, some of the things, like, they have been really good about doing, the what you have to do to beat the Raptors. Blitz Lowry, blitz VanVleet, but then they just let things, sometimes they just let the game kind of slip away from them, make mental mistakes, and then they let Fred go boom, boom, 2 quick threes. I thought that changed the game because of the Celtics. And the Celtics had the ball to begin the quarter. If they maybe scored and go up 12, then all of a sudden it becomes the Raptors trying to rally and they're trying to do too much, but they didn't score, and then all of a sudden here's Fred with a 3, it's 7. They don't score again, here's Fred with a 3, it's 4. Then it's like, that's a game. So I think it all depends on the Celtics' ability to bounce back. This is the first time, their first loss in the playoff in the bubble. They're mad, they're visibly angry. They felt like they should have won the game. They felt like they just didn't make one last play. And we'll see what happens. I thought Toronto would come out game 3 and really punch him in the mouth. And they really didn't. And the Celtics kind of held, they did get a little flurries in and have their little runs, but the Celtics kind of held on and then took control, quote unquote, with that 10-point lead at halftime. But then the Raptors, Nick Nurse went to a zone. And if you're the Celtics, you look at it like this, it was a great pass and great shot by Lowry and Anunoby, but Tatum was just awful last night. Tatum just didn't have the big impact. They didn't make the plays. Smart wasn't very good. They struggled. They had some guys struggle, and they still lost by a miracle. I don't say miracle, but a very unlikely shot. So if you're the Celtics, you feel like if we do what we're supposed to do, we should win game 4. But the Raptors might feel like, hey, let's get Norman Powell going. He hasn't been good. Hopefully Gasol becomes himself, and let's get some guys who haven't been themselves be themselves. So it could be a war on Saturday.
Last question for you, Gary, and I really appreciate the time. And I just want to sort of circle back to our first discussion just about the players and continuing this important dialogue. And I think as basketball continues to happen, I really think it's important for the media, and I know that the Toronto Raptors media made a real importance of this, is to keep stressing that while basketball is going on, there are important social issues that are happening right now that need to be addressed. How important is it for the media to continue to amplify what these players are saying just in regards to the messaging, so that that is still at the forefront and that we don't forget that as the basketball games continue?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think that the media, we understand this is what these guys have to say, and it's news. And I think it has to be respected. You can't, we asked these guys to be more than just jocks, and now that they're jocks, we can't have a problem when they want to discuss non-basketball issues. They love the game. They want to talk hoop too. I mean, you're not going to ask about social issues after last night's game. The guys want to talk about the game. All the guys talked about the game, but at a practice or before a game or a situation off day, they might have something to say. And I think it's important for us to cover these issues and understand where these guys are coming from. We can't have it both ways. We can't tell them, well, all you guys are members of the community, be active in the community, help people who are less fortunate than you are, who live in these cities. Don't just play in these cities and then just go back to your, $5 million mansion and just live it up, and where people are suffering, do something. And then now that these guys are trying to do something, we can't have a problem when they do. So I believe that it's important for us and imperative for us to cover these issues as well. When these guys talk about it, it's a news story. That's what they have to say. If LeBron James talks about being a black man in America and how he's scared, that's a news story to cover. And I think that's important.
Absolutely. And just before I finish, I just think in addition, it's important for white people, I think, to be allies here, because it's oftentimes it's put on, the athletes, black people, and they have the burden to always be asked about this and to explain their experiences. But I think what this year has taught us is that these athletes are more than athletes. They're human beings that have lived experiences, that have their own stories, and we need to respect that and view them as that, because they're more than just guys that can that can hoop and ball.
Yeah, I think it's a collective effort, and I do think it's important for people who aren't African American or who aren't people of color, who aren't disadvantaged, to understand that there's a struggle out there. And just because it doesn't directly involve you doesn't mean there's not a struggle. Doesn't mean that there aren't people suffering, and doesn't mean that even though there's people who are millionaires now, these players, you're asking them to forget where they came from. You're asking them, it's like being grown up and remembering how your father, used to, whip you after doing something bad. Like, that stuff you don't let go. You don't let go of your childhood. There's plenty of people who still have issues with childhood trauma or whatever, who are productive people and aren't, struggling, but they still think about those things. So just imagine players who are from some of these disadvantaged communities. They don't forget that either. It's not like, oh, well, I'm living this life now, so I don't think about being poor. I don't think about what my mom had to go through, or my mom had to, take a bus to work, where I walked to practice. Like, they think about that stuff. That was stuff that built them. So to ask them to, or just say that they shouldn't have a voice because they're not living that life currently, I think is really unfair. And they have to be allowed, because we all reflect on our past. Our past is what built us.
Gary Washburn is a national NBA writer for the Boston Globe. Gary, I wish you all the best for the rest of the NBA playoffs, and thank you so much for coming on Raptors Endgame here on Raptors Republic.
Oh, no problem. Great to be here.